Evening, he said it, the house was so quiet you could hear the clock ticking in the hallway. He'd just finished on a long call, something about a merger. And he came into the living room looking tired. But it wasn't a soft tiredness, it was a sharp, brittle kind of tired. He poured a drink and sat across from me. And he said it so calmly, so reasonably, "I need you to understand something from this point on. You are not to say a word to anyone about our finances, not to your sister, not to your friends. No one." He took a sip of his drink. "It's for our protection, things are delicate. Something we should discuss through our council." She said it again, slower, "through our council." She explained that this would establish a boundary. It would signal that the informal rules of our marriage were over. We were now operating under the formal rules of the law. She would be my voice, and every word she spoke would be chosen to advance my position. Hiring her wasn't just about getting a lawyer, it was about building a fortress. And the first rule of the fortress was silence. Silence. I found my voice as a protector. The most loving act wasn't fighting for them in a war of words, it was ending the war altogether. It was building a quiet, predictable world for them, where the only thing that mattered was their safety and their happiness. Sometimes love isn't about what you say, it's about having the strength to stop speaking and to let a better, stronger structure speak for the peace you desperately want to create. The gallery opening was a triumph, at least that's what my Instagram feed would show tomorrow. A cascade of photos, me in a simple black dress, my hand resting on my husband's arm, his smile broad and confident. The perfect power couple bathed in the soft light of expensive champagne and admiration. You could feel the envy in the room. A subtle hum beneath the polite conversation. We'd spent a decade building this, not just a life, but a brand, the charitable foundation, the board memberships, the carefully curated social media presence that showed a marriage of true partnership and mutual respect. It was a beautiful gilded cage, and I was the prized canary. He was in his element tonight, holding court by the large abstract sculpture. I watched him from across the room, a familiar ache settling in my chest. It was the ache of performance, of smiling at his jokes, of nodding in agreement at his points, of playing my part to perfection. Everyone saw the facade, no one saw the cracks, especially the one that had fissured open just 2 days prior. A private betrayal so profound it had turned the world I knew into ash. It was a forgotten iPad left synced to his cloud account, a series of messages that were not meant for my eyes, not just one woman, but a pattern stretching back years. A secret life funded by our shared accounts, our shared name. The details are still a physical pain to recall, the pet names he used for them, the same ones he used for me, the lies about business trips, about working late, the sheer calculated duplicity of it all. When I confronted him, his reaction wasn't remorse, it was cold, pragmatic panic. His first words weren't an apology, they were an instruction. "You will not say a word to anyone, do you understand me? We need to manage this, we have to protect our image." Our image, the words hung in the air, toxic and absurd. He wasn't worried about us, about our marriage. He was worried about the brand, the donations to his political aspirations, the valuation of his company, the perception of our perfect life. My grief, my rage, my utter devastation were to him nothing more than a public relations problem to be contained. And his solution was my silence, my complicity in the continued lie. The internal conflict was a war on one side, the terrified wife who had been conditioned for years to preserve this illusion at all costs, to avoid the scandal, to keep the family name pristine. On the other side, a new raw voice screaming for justice, for truth, for the simple, brutal right to not have to pretend anymore. I looked at him across that gallery, laughing with the mayor, and I knew I could not be silent. But I also knew I could not fight this battle on my own. His world was one of press manipulation and backroom deals. Mine had been one of charity luncheons and interior design. I needed an equalizer. I needed someone who spoke the language of power, without emotion, only fact. The next morning I sat in a stark modern office on the 34th floor, a world away from my own. The woman across the glass desk was not warm, she was precise. Her name was Alina Vance, and she was the most feared crisis management attorney in the city. She listened, without a flicker of surprise, as I laid out the evidence, the messages, the financial records I'd gathered. The letter arrived at his office a week later, I know, because he called me, his voice tight, with a confusion he was trying to mask as anger. "What is this?" he said. "I just got a letter from a lawyer, Alina Rostova. It says she represents you." I was standing in the kitchen holding the phone, looking out at the garden. I could feel the cool countertop under my other hand. I took a breath. I think I said, my voice calm quieter. Then I expected that we should discuss this through our counsel. There was a silence on the other end. She didn't offer sympathy, she offered strategy. The narrative is the battlefield, she said, her voice calm and level. He will try to control it. He will likely paint you as emotional, unstable, a spurned woman, exaggerating claims. We will not give him that opportunity. We will control the narrative. First, her plan was breathtaking in its audacity. We would not wait for a leak, for a rumor, for him to strike. We would preempt the entire scandal with a press release, not from me, but from her office, an official statement from my legal counsel. It would be a weapon dressed in the impeccable armor of legal language. The strategy was all about framing. We would not engage in emotional mudslinging. We would present cold, hard, undeniable facts. The statement would acknowledge the irrevocable breakdown of the marriage, confirm my filing for divorce, and cite irreconcilable differences. But the key was the next part. It would state clearly and without melodrama that the filing was supported by evidence of serious financial misconduct and personal betrayals that made reconciliation impossible. It would conclude by stating that I would be making no further comments to the press, and that all inquiries should be directed to my attorney. The goal was dignity. It was to position me not as a victim, but as a principled individual taking necessary decisive action. It was to make his potential responses look like the flailing of a guilty man. The morning the press release went out, the world went quiet for a moment, and then it exploded. My phone began to vibrate, a frantic, angry insect on the marble countertop. First it was text messages from so-called friends, subtle probes for gossip. Then the calls started, unknown numbers, news outlets, television stations. I let them all ring. I had already turned off all notifications on my social media. I sat in my quiet kitchen, the same kitchen featured in a magazine spread just 6 months earlier as a testament to effortless family living, and I drank my tea. I felt a strange, detached calm. The frenzy was immediate. I saw the news alerts pop up on my laptop. Prominent philanthropist files for divorce alleges misconduct, power couple split, shrouded in scandal. Reporters staked out our home, his office. I saw the footage on a news channel. There he was, my husband, trying to enter his building, surrounded by a scrum of shouting journalists. His face was a mask of strained patience, but I saw the panic in his eyes. He stopped and said a few words. I turned up the volume. This is a private family matter, he said, his voice tight, a misunderstanding that is being blown out of proportion by lawyers. My wife is very upset, and I am concerned for her well-being. There it was, the first move, painting me as the emotional unstable one, the upset wife, manipulated by legal counsel. But it fell flat, because minutes later another clip played. A reporter had caught Eleanor Vance entering her office building. She stopped, impeccable in a tailored suit, and faced the cameras for exactly 30 seconds. My client has stated her position clearly and factually in our release, she said, her voice cutting through the noise like a scalpel. She is pursuing a legal course of action to address serious matters. We will not be trying this case in the media. Any further statements will come through this office. Upon the conclusion of the appropriate legal proceedings, she didn't take questions. She turned and walked inside. The contrast was devastating. His response was vague, emotional, and dismissive. Hers was specific, factual, and authoritative. The power had subtly, irrevocably shifted. Of the line, it was a thick, heavy silence. I could almost hear his brain trying to process it. This wasn't a fight. This wasn't me being emotional. This was a procedure. For the next week I was a ghost in my own life. I left the house only for meetings with Eleanor. I followed her instructions to the letter. No statements, no social media posts, no responses to texts from mutual friends fishing for information. My silence was a wall. Meanwhile, he was floundering. He gave another interview, longer, this time trying to explain away the financial records as investment strategies and the messages as harmless flirtation. But with each new detail he offered, he only confirmed the facts my lawyer had alluded to. He was trying to plug a dozen leaks in a dam, but the water was already pouring through. The media, having been fed a consistent, dignified line from my side, began to frame the story around his inconsistencies. The headline shifted from messy divorce to fall of a titan. The scandal eventually quieted, as they all do. The news cycle moved on to the next crisis. But the aftermath was clear. My reputation, while now associated with the scandal, was associated with integrity and strength. I was the woman who had remained silent, not out of weakness, but out of a powerful strategic choice. I was the one who had let the facts speak for themselves. His reputation, however, was in tatters. The business deals fell through, the political backing evaporated, the facade of the perfect man was gone, revealing the desperate individual beneath. In the end, the divorce settlement was more than fair. The financial misconduct was proven easily. The prenuptial agreement was set aside due to his actions. But the real victory wasn't in the financial statements. It was in the quiet understanding that settled deep within me. True strength wasn't about hiding the truth to preserve a false image. It wasn't about screaming my pain from the rooftops and getting dragged into a public mudslinging match that would have only made me look like the upset wife he claimed. The real power was in choosing my weapon. It was in recognizing that in a world built on perception, the most powerful voice is sometimes not your own. It is the clear, confident, unassailable voice of the law speaking truth, with a dignity that no personal attack can shake. He told me not to speak, thinking he was muzzling me. But in my silence, I found a louder, more potent voice. I let my lawyer speak for me. And in doing so, I didn't just win the narrative, I reclaimed my entire self. The house was never quiet, but it was a specific kind of noise: the hum of the refrigerator, the ticking of the clock in the hall, the sound of my own footsteps on the hardwood floor. It was a silence filled with listening. I was always listening for him, for the sound of his car in the driveway, for the turn of his key in the lock, for the particular weight of his step as he came inside. My whole day was structured around those sounds, around anticipating his mood, his needs. The air in our home felt thick, heavy, like you had to push your way through it. Every word I spoke had to be measured, weighed for its potential consequence. A simple question like, "Did you have a good day at work?" could be a minefield. If it was a bad day, my asking was prying, nagging. If it was a good day, my tone might not have been celebratory enough. There was no rulebook, no consistent logic. The rules changed with his mood, and I was always expected to just know. The final straw, the moment the illusion shattered completely, was so small. It was a Tuesday evening. We were in the kitchen. I was making dinner. He was standing by the island, scrolling through his phone. I remember the steam rising from the pot of water on the stove. I mentioned my voice, deliberately light, almost casual, that my sister had called. I said I was thinking of having coffee with her that weekend, just a quick catch-up. The air shifted instantly. The temperature in the room didn't change, but I felt a coldness settle over me. He didn't look up from his phone. His voice was flat, quiet, which was always so much worse than yelling no. He said, "You're not going." I remember my hand pausing, the wooden spoon hovering over the pot. I took a breath, a small one. And I said, "Why not? It's just for an hour." That's when he looked at me. It wasn't anger in his eyes. Not yet. It was a cold, flat finality. He put his phone down on the counter, the sound of it hitting the marble like a period at the end of a sentence. Because He came home early. He walked into the house, his briefcase still in his hand. "We need to talk." He said. His tone was the one he used with junior associates who'd made a mistake. I was in the living room reading a book. I looked up. "About the letter from my attorney?" I asked. He stared at me. "Yes, about the letter from your attorney." He said the word like it was a foreign object. "What is this about? What are you trying to do?" I closed my book, marking the page with my finger. "Alina has outlined my position." I said. "If you said so," he said, his voice dropping even lower. "And because you talk too much, you tell her things. You don't need to speak to anyone outside this house. In fact, don't consider that an instruction." It wasn't the first time he'd told me to be quiet. It was the first time he'd so explicitly, so calmly erased my right to have a conversation with my own family. My autonomy wasn't just being questioned. It was being formally revoked. In that moment, standing in my own kitchen, with the steam from the pasta water fogging up the window, I felt myself disappear. I wasn't a person anymore. I was a function, an accessory that had malfunctioned by wanting to speak. The fear was a physical thing, a tightness my chest that made it hard to breathe. But underneath the fear, something else sparked, a tiny defiant ember. This was it. This was the line. If I stayed, I would truly, completely vanish. The planning phase that followed was the most terrifying period of my life. Every move felt like it was under a microscope. I feared for my safety in a way I never had before. I knew that if he even suspected I was thinking about leaving, the consequences would be severe. I started to see the house not as a home, but as a prison, whose warden I had to deceive. My freedom depended on my ability to pretend perfectly that his control was absolute. The lawyer's office felt like a different planet. The air was cool, clean. The chairs were comfortable. There were plants by the window. Her name was Sarah, and she had a calm, steady presence that immediately made me feel like I might not shatter into a million pieces. sitting across from her explaining the situation in a hushed, rushed voice. I kept waiting for her to dismiss me to tell me I was overreacting. But she didn't. She listened, she took notes. And she nodded with a grim understanding. She specialized. Situations like mine, she said, coercive control. It wasn't about black eyes, it was about the slow, systematic dismantling of a person's spirit. She was my lifeline thrown to me in the middle of an ocean. I was drowning in the first step, she explained. Was a protective order. It felt like a piece of paper so flimsy, against the solid wall of his presence in my life. But she explained it wasn't just paper, it was the full weight of the law. It was a boundary, drawn by a judge, that he would cross at his peril. She coordinated everything with a precision that felt military. We planned the day, the hour. My safety was the only priority. She helped me secure a place, to stay, a small apartment, leased through a connection of hers. A place he would never think to look. Then came the gathering of documents. It felt like assembling evidence of a life. I used to have birth certificate, passport, social security card, bank statements, things I had to locate and remove without raising suspicion. I did it in tiny, heart-pounding increments of paper tucked into a book, a file transferred to my bag during a trip to the grocery store. It was a secret mission I was running in my own home. And Sarah was my command center. The most crucial part of the plan was the serving of the divorce papers. She was adamant they would not be delivered to the house. They would be served on him at his office, in the middle of a workday, surrounded by his colleagues. It created physical distance, a buffer zone. It placed him in a professional environment where any outburst would have social and professional consequences. He would be forced to absorb the shock alone, in a space where he couldn't immediately turn his anger on me. The day it happened, I was already in the new apartment. The movers arranged by Sarah's office had come and gone in a window of time. They knew he would be in a mandatory meeting. They took only what was essential, what was legally mine. I stood in the empty, quiet space, my heart hammering against my ribs. I had my phone in my hand, waiting for the text from Sarah that would signal the deed was done. The minutes felt like hours. I paced the bare floors, my ears straining for any sound from the hallway, half expecting him have a response. You should direct it to her. I saw the flash of real anger. Then the control slipping. I am talking to you, my wife. Why are you hiding behind some lawyer? That was the test. That was the moment where the old me would have broken, would have started explaining, justifying, trying to make him understand. But the new me just looked at him. I repeated the phrase like a mantra. All communication about the dissolution of our marriage needs to go through our lawyers. It's for the best. Have figured it out. To come bursting through the door. Then my phone buzzed. A single word from Sarah served a wave of nausea and relief, washed over me so violently, I had to sit down on the floor. It was done. The first domino had fallen. His reaction was immediate, and exactly as Sarah had predicted. My phone lit up. First a text, a single question mark. Then another. Then the phone started ringing. His name flashed on the screen over and over. The sound was like an alarm, a siren from my old life. I let it ring. I didn't block the number. Sarah had instructed me not to. We needed a record. After the fifth call, the texts started. They began with confusion, then shifted to anger, then to threats, then to pleading. The tone cycled through all the stages of his control. I read them, my hands trembling, but I didn't feel the fear I expected. Because with each message, I knew Sarah was seeing it too. I was forwarding everything to her. As per our agreement, my silence was no longer a symptom of my fear. It was a strategy. It was a barrier he was screaming into a void. And every scream was being documented, recorded, added to the file that would protect me. He tried every tactic. He called from unknown numbers. I let them go to voicemail. He sent emails. I had them automatically forwarded to Sarah. He showed up at the house. But I wasn't there. He called my family, my friends, spinning stories about me being unstable, confused. Sarah had preempted this. She had helped me send a brief, calm message to a few key people explaining I was safe, and that any communication should go through my attorney. The wall was up, the shield of the law was in place. And it was impenetrable. His anger couldn't touch me, his manipulations couldn't reach me. The profound relief of that was almost dizzying. For the first time in years, the constant background hum of anxiety in my body began to quiet. I was physically safe. I was legally protected. My silence, which had once been a cage, was now my greatest source of power. He had told me not to speak. And now I wasn't speaking to him. I was letting the law speak for me. And the law spoke a language he couldn't bully, intimidate, or control. The legal process became the structure upon which I could build my new beginning. The court dates, the paperwork, the negotiations, they were all handled through Sarah, She was my voice, my advocate, my shield. She translated my fears and my needs into legal arguments. She faced his lawyer's aggression, so I didn't have to. She absorbed the brunt of his fury and channeled it into a cold clinical file folder. This process, this slow methodical unraveling of our legal bonds, was the safest I had ever felt. It was the opposite of the chaotic, unpredictable environment I had lived in. This had rules, procedures, order. It was fair. The first time I truly spoke freely was in my therapist's office a few weeks after I had left. The room was warm with soft lighting. The therapist, a woman with kind eyes, simply said, "Tell me about what brought you here." And I did. I started talking. And I didn't stop. The words came out in a flood. A torrent of things I had held inside for years. I talked about the fear, the isolation, the slow erosion of my self-esteem. I talked about the small moments of cruelty I had normalized. I cried. I got angry. Spoke without measuring every word, without calculating the potential reaction. My voice, which had become so small and hesitant, grew stronger with each sentence. It was shaky at first, like a muscle that hadn't been used in a long time. But it was mine. It was the sound of my own mind, my own heart, finally being expressed without a filter of fear. The attempts to draw me out were constant. He'd try over dinner, asking pointed questions about what I thought was fair. He'd leave bank statements on the kitchen island, hoping I'd comment. He sent me long, pleading emails late at night full of memories and questions about why I was doing this. I read them. I felt every word. But I didn't reply every single time. I forwarded them to Alina. She would send a brief professional response to his lawyer. "My client has forwarded your clients." And I realized then the profound truth of my escape. My husband told me not to speak. He believed that by silencing me he could control me. But in the end his command was his undoing. My silence became my weapon. And when I chose to channel my voice through my lawyer, I wasn't surrendering it. I was amplifying it. I was giving it the power of the entire justice system. Her voice, calm, professional, and unshakable, was the key that unlocked the door to my own. She spoke the words I couldn't safely say until I was ready. She fought the battles I didn't have the strength to fight alone. And when the legal dust began to settle, and the space around me felt secure, I found my voice again. It was waiting for me, a little rusty, but intact. It was the first and most important thing I reclaimed. The lawyer's voice was the tool, the necessary instrument, that allowed me to finally hear my own. The first sign was the glow his phone would light up on the nightstand, long after he thought I was asleep, a soft blue pulse in the dark, a tiny beacon of a secret life. At first I told myself it was work, a late email, a stressed colleague. But the rhythm was wrong for work. Work messages are frantic, clustered. These were leisurely, a single message, then a long pause, then a reply, a conversation. Then came the passwords. His phone, which had always been open, suddenly had a fingerprint lock. The laptop we shared now demanded a code I didn't know. When I asked casually over coffee, he laughed it off. "Oh, you know, with all the data breaches these days, better to be safe." He reached over and patted my hand. "Don't worry your pretty little head about it." But I did worry. The worry curdled into a cold, hard knot in my stomach. I started noticing other things, the way he'd angle his body away from me when scrolling through his phone, the fact that he'd started taking his phone into the bathroom with him, the strange new emojis that would pop up in his notifications, a winking face, a heart, a cocktail glass, things he never used with me. So I gathered my courage. One evening, the television was on some forgettable drama, but the real tension was in the silence between us on the couch. I took a breath. These late-night messages. I began keeping my voice light. "Everything okay at the office? You seem distracted." The change in him was instant. The relaxed posture vanished. He sat up straight, his face closing like a door. "There you go again," he said, his voice flat and cold. "Looking for problems where there aren't any. You're always so paranoid." The word hit me like a slap. Paranoia. It made my concern sound like a sickness, a character flaw. "I am not paranoid, I am just observant," I said, my voice trembling slightly. "Observant," he scoffed. "It's suffocating, this constant suspicion. I can't have my phone buzz without you giving me that look." He stood up, looming over me. "I'm tired of it. I won't have you accusing me, so here's what's going to happen. You are going to stop this right now. You are not to speak about this again. Do you understand me? Not a word." The command was absolute. It wasn't a request, it was an edict. "Don't speak." And in that moment, I knew with a chilling certainty that talking was useless. Words between us were just weapons he would use to bludgeon me into silence. My voice, my feelings, my observations, they were all invalid in his court. If I was going to discover the truth, I couldn't use my voice. I had to use his, I had to listen to the digital trail he was so carelessly leaving behind. Communication, dated the 12th, we do not believe this is a productive avenue for discussion. My silence was a wall, his words were just pebbles bouncing off it. The decision to stop speaking to him about it was the quietest, most profound decision of my life. It was like a switch flipped inside me, the emotional part of me, the part that wanted to cry and scream and demand answers, went silent. A colder, clearer part took over. This was no longer about our marriage, this was an investigation. I knew I couldn't do it alone. I am not a tech wizard. I know how to send an email, pay a bill online. But digging into phone records, understanding metadata, that was a different language. I needed a translator, I needed a lawyer. Finding Sarah was like finding a lifeboat in a stormy sea. Her office was calm, all soft grays and clean lines. She listened, not with the impatient ear of a friend who's heard it all before, but with the focused attention of a strategist. I told her everything: the glow, the passwords, the command for silence. I didn't cry, I just presented the facts. She nodded slowly. The pretty little head comment is condescending. But it's not evidence. The command not to speak is controlling. But it's his word against yours. What we need is objective third-party data. We need the story his own devices are telling. She laid out a plan. It was methodical, ethical, and completely ruthless in its efficiency. We won't hack his phone, that's illegal. But we can use the legal system to ask for what we're entitled to see. She explained the process of subpoenas. We would file for divorce on the grounds of irreconcilable differences. Once the petition was filed, we had the right to discovery. We could formally request the documents that would tell the real story. The first subpoena was for the cell phone records. When the thick envelope arrived, Sarah called me, and spread out on her large conference table were pages and pages of numbers and times. To me, it was a jumble. To her, it was a narrative. She used a yellow highlighter. See this number, it appears hundreds of times, late nights, early mornings. And look, she said, pointing to the duration of the calls. Many of these are over an hour long. Now look at this date. You were out of town visiting your sister. She highlighted a cluster of calls that started at 10 p.m. and went until 2 in the morning. This isn't a client, this is a relationship. Next were the financial records, another subpoena: credit card statements, bank accounts. Sarah's paralegal helped her cross-reference the dates and times. A charge from a fancy hotel downtown. On a night, he told me, he was working late. A receipt from a jewelry store for a necklace. I had never seen 2 dinners at an intimate restaurant, both for 2 on evenings. He claimed to be at business dinners. Then came the digital diary. Sarah had me start a journal, but not of my feelings, a logbook. I noted when he was secretive with his phone. When he left the room to take a call, I took screenshots of our shared calendar, marking the discrepancies between his stated whereabouts and the evidence we were gathering. It was all time-stamped, factual, unemotional. The most damning evidence came from an unexpected place: our shared cloud storage for photos. I was looking for a picture of our dog from last Christmas, scrolling through the timeline. When I saw them photos, I had never taken selfies of him smiling in a hotel room, a picture of a table set for 2 with wine glasses, and then a screenshot he had accidentally saved to the cloud. It was a fragment of a text conversation. The words were small on my screen, but I could read them: can't wait to see you again. The legal process became like a game of chess played in slow motion. Each move was a document: a filing for financial disclosure, a request for a deposition. Every time his lawyer sent something, Alina would explain it to me. She'd break down the strategy behind it. He's trying to establish that you were a passive participant in the finances. She'd say, this request is a fishing expedition. They're looking for a weakness. And she would craft the response. Her words were precise, unemotional, and devastatingly effective. I hate lying to her, but it's for the best. We'll be together soon. I felt a physical nausea wash over me. I didn't scream, I didn't cry. I took a screenshot of the screenshot, saved it to a flash drive, and handed it to Sarah at our next meeting. She looked at it, then at me. Her expression was grim, but satisfied. This, she said softly, is his voice, and now he'll have to listen to it. The day of the first mediation session was surreal. I wore a simple black dress. I felt like I was going to a funeral, which in a way I was. My husband, soon to be ex-husband, arrived with his lawyer. He looked confident, almost smug. He gave me a tight, dismissive smile. He still thought this was about my hysterical suspicions. He thought he was there to manage my emotions. The mediator, a neutral, soft-spoken woman, started the session. My husband's lawyer began by painting a picture of a marriage that had simply run its course. He talked about growing apart, about the difficulties of long-term commitment. He suggested a swift, amicable separation. Then it was Sarah's turn. She didn't look at my husband. She addressed the mediator. While my client has indeed suffered from the breakdown of this marriage, the cause is not a simple case of growing apart. The cause is a pattern of deliberate deception and financial dissipation. She opened a binder. She didn't raise her voice. She was calm, factual, a professor presenting a thesis. If we turn to tab 1, we have the cell phone records. She read out the number, the frequency of the calls, the dates that correlated with my absence. Tab 2, the financial records. She listed the hotel charge, the jewelry store, the dinners. Tab 3, the digital evidence from the cloud storage. She didn't read the text aloud. She simply slid a printed copy across the table to the mediator and to my husband's lawyers. I watched my husband's face. I saw the color drain from it. The smug confidence evaporated, replaced by a slow-dawning horror. He stared at the printed wordsheet's own words. If they were a ghost, his jaw tightened. He looked from the paper to me. And for the first time, I didn't look away. I held his gaze. My expression was neutral. There was no anger there, no accusation, just a quiet, final acknowledgement of the truth. His lawyer shuffled the papers, uncomfortably, completely blindsided. Sarah continued, her voice, the only sound in the suddenly cold room, given the evidence of a sustained secondary relationship, coupled with the dissipation of marital assets. To support that relationship, a simple 50-50 split is not equitable. We are seeking a settlement that reflects this breach of trust. My husband was speechless. The man who had commanded me not to speak had been rendered mute by the echo of his own lies. I had kept my promise. I hadn't spoken. I had let the evidence speak for me, and it was a deafening roar. The settlement was swift. After that, his lawyer, faced with an insurmountable paper trail, advised him to settle. The financial terms were significantly in my favor. The house, a larger portion of the retirement account, spousal support. It wasn't about greed, it was about consequence. She forced him to produce documents he declaimed didn't exist. She exposed inconsistencies in his statements. She built our case brick by brick. And my only job was to provide her with the truth and maintain my silence. The power dynamic had completely flipped. He was the one reacting now. He was the one getting frustrated, making mistakes. The irony was thick enough to taste. His command for silence was what forced me to become a detective. His attempt to control the narrative was what led to his own story being exposed in such a brutal, undeniable way. By telling me not to use my voice, he pushed me to find a more powerful one, a voice made of data, of timestamps, of financial transactions, a voice that the law understood perfectly. In the end, I didn't just get a settlement, I got an education. I learned that truth isn't always something you feel. Sometimes it's something you document. I learned that power isn't always about shouting. Sometimes it's about compiling a spreadsheet so precise that it becomes a weapon. The password to his phone was the first lock. The password to my new life was understanding that I didn't need to break his locks. I just needed to follow the digital footprints he left in the sand, all the way to the courthouse steps. And I learned that the most satisfying silence is not the one forced upon you, but the one you choose, while your lawyer reads your husband's love messages to another woman aloud in a room full of strangers. For years the air in our house felt thick, not with anger, not with passion, but with a heavy, silent dismissal. It was a spiritual suffocation. I'd have an idea, something simple like wanting to take a painting class on Tuesday nights. I'd mention it over dinner, my voice tentative, testing the waters. He wouldn't even look up from his plate. Just a hum, a non-committal sound that meant I've heard you, but what you've said has no weight. Or I'd get excited about a book I was reading, something that sparked a thought about life, about the world, and I'd try to share it. He'd listen for a moment, then cut in with a practical perspective, reducing my wonder to a naive fantasy. It was a constant, gentle erosion. Every dream I voiced was met with a reason it was impractical. Every feeling I expressed was analyzed for its logical flaws. My inner world, the quiet hum of my soul, became a nuisance, to be managed, a static, to be tuned out. Final command, the one that broke something open inside me, was so simple. It was during an argument, one of those circular talks that went nowhere. I was trying to explain why I felt lonely, why the distance between us felt like a physical chasm. He held up his hand, not angrily, but with a chilling finality, like a judge sustaining an objection. He said, "Just stop, don't speak, everything you say just makes it worse." And I stopped in that moment. My voice didn't just falter, it seemed. Retreat deep inside me into a place so dark and quiet I couldn't find it anymore. That was the real dark night of the soul. It wasn't about being sad or angry. It was a profound feeling of being spiritually lost. I was a ghost in my own life, unheard even by myself. The connection to anything that made me feel alive, that made me feel like me, had been severed. I'd look in the mirror and see a stranger going through the motions, a shell performing the role of a wife. The idea to call a lawyer didn't come as a burst of anger. It arrived quietly like a dawn after that long dark night. It wasn't about revenge. Revenge is a hot ego-driven thing. This was colder, clearer. It felt like honor, a deep, solemn duty to a part of myself. I had abandoned. Hiring a lawyer was the first tangible act of self-respect I had taken in years. I wasn't hiring her to fight my battles for me. I was hiring her to be an instrument, a tool for a necessary separation. She became my mind, the embodiment of a boundary. She was the clear, unemotional line in the sand that I had been unable to draw myself. Her words, her letters, her feelings, they weren't attacks. They were a ritual, a ceremony, to formally dissolve the old broken contract of our marriage. A contract that had stipulated my silence. This legal process was the mechanism to create a vacuum, a sacred space, where something new could eventually grow. Walking into the mediation room for the first time was like entering a strange, sterile temple. The air was cool, the lighting fluorescent. There was a large polished table. My husband was already there, sitting stiffly. He tried to catch my eye, to give me that familiar look of exasperated control. But I didn't look at him. I sat down next to my lawyer, and I felt a calm I hadn't felt in a decade. The mediator, a woman with a kind but firm face, began to speak about the process, and I just listened. The final settlement meeting was held in a conference room at Alina's firm. I sat next to her. He sat across the table with his lawyer, a man who looked tired. The negotiation lasted for hours. But it wasn't a shouting match. It was a quiet, intense exchange of numbers and clauses. Alina was immovable. She cited statutes. She referenced precedents. She presented the evidence we had gathered. I didn't say a word. I just listened. I watched my husband's face. I saw the anger drain away, replaced by watched my husband's ego come into the room like a third party. I saw him lean forward, ready to debate, to explain, to justify. He spoke to my lawyer as if she were me, using the same tone of patient reasoning he always used to dismantle my feelings. But she wasn't me. She was an immovable object. She listened, she took notes. And then she responded with facts, with precedents, with the calm, unassailable language of the law. It was fascinating to watch his arguments, which had always felt so powerful and convincing to me, in the privacy of our home now, fell flat against the impartiality of the process. He couldn't dismiss the law. He couldn't tell the mediator to stop speaking. His frustration was palpable. His ego was clashing against a system that didn't care about his perspective, only about fairness and evidence. And through it all I remained silent. But my silence was different now. It wasn't the silence of suppression. It was the silence of observation. It was a centered, peaceful quiet. I was finally a witness, not a participant, in my own dismantling. My lawyer's words became a conduit. She was speaking for my rights, for my share of a life we'd built. But it felt like she was speaking for something else too. She was giving voice to a truth that had been trapped inside me for so long, the truth that I existed, that my needs mattered, that my contributions had value. It was a truth that needed to be spoken aloud in a formal setting. For my own healing to begin, it was a form of absolution. When the final papers were signed, and the divorce was decreed, the feeling wasn't one of victory. It was a profound and quiet peace. It was the peace of a long journey ending. I walked out of the courthouse alone. But I didn't feel lonely. I felt whole. In the months that followed, I started to understand something fundamental about my voice. I had always thought that having a voice meant arguing, defending, explaining myself. Until I was blue in the face, I thought it was about winning the conversation. But I had it all wrong. My true voice, my authentic power, wasn't about that at all. It was about choice. It was about the sovereign right to choose when to speak and when to remain silent. It was about knowing that my energy was precious and that I got to decide where to spend it. The greatest act of speaking up for myself was paradoxically choosing not to speak to him anymore. It was redirecting that energy inward. By letting my lawyer speak for my rights in that courtroom, I had finally created the quiet necessary to listen. And what I started to hear was my own soul. It was a faint sound at first, like a whisper. After a long illness, it was in the music I chose to play in my new apartment. It was in the color I decided to paint the wall with no one to question it. It was in the books I read, without having to justify their point. It was in the simple daily act of asking myself, what do I want, and then honoring the answer, no matter how small. The spiritual rebirth wasn't a sudden flash of light. It was a slow, gentle awakening. It was the realization that I had traded my soul for the illusion of security, for the hope of being seen by someone who was incapable of seeing me. The divorce was the legal event, but the real transformation was internal. It was the quiet, steadfast decision to never again hand the microphone of my life to someone else. My husband told me not to speak, so I let my lawyer do it for me, and in doing so, I learned the most valuable lesson of all, that my true voice doesn't always need to be heard by others to be real. Sometimes its most important work is simply to be listened to by me. And I remember nodding. I remember the weight of the sofa under me, the feel of the fabric under my fingers. I looked at him, at this man I'd shared a life with for 15 years. And I saw it. It wasn't in his words. Not really, it was in his eyes. There was a calculation there, a closing of a gate. This wasn't about protection. This was about containment. He was building a wall around me, and the first brick was my own silence. Weary respect. He wasn't looking at me anymore, he was looking at her. He was negotiating with her. He had finally accepted that my voice was now a legal entity separate from me, and it was stronger than he ever could have imagined. When we signed the papers, it was anticlimactic, just a series of signatures on dotted lines. But it was a good agreement. It was fair. It gave me security. It acknowledged my contribution to our life together, in a way he had never been able to do verbally. Afterwards, alone in my new apartment, I thought about that first command, don't say a word. He thought he was muzzling me. He thought he was taking my power away. But he was actually giving me the key to my freedom. By refusing to speak in his arena on his terms, I forced the fight onto a battlefield where I could win. Surrendering my voice to a professional was the most powerful thing I have ever done. It was the ultimate act of reclaiming my power. I had let my lawyer speak for me, and in doing so I had finally found my own voice, a voice that didn't need to argue or plead or explain, a voice that simply stated the facts. And in that statement, my world was silk and marble, soft edges, and cold, hard surfaces that never warmed to the touch. Our home was a showpiece, a museum curated by him, where every piece of art was placed just so. And I was the most carefully positioned object of all. The views from the floor-to-ceiling windows were breathtaking, but they just felt like a higher grade of bars. He gave me everything. You could put a price on: clothes, cars, a name that opened doors. But he took the one thing that was truly mine, my voice. It started subtly, a gentle hand on my arm at a charity gala. Darling, perhaps, let me handle that story. You know how you can get the details muddled. A smile for the listeners, but a pressure on my wrist that was anything but gentle. It was a correction. Then it became a suggestion. It's better for us, for our standing, if you simply smile and look beautiful. Talking politics, it's not your strength. He made it sound like concern, like he was protecting me from my own inadequacies. But the threat was as clear as the diamond choker he fastened around my neck each evening. A misstep, a wrong word in the wrong ear, and this beautiful life, this stability could vanish. He made sure I knew I had nowhere to go, that I was utterly dependent on his goodwill. The paranoia became a second skin. I'd be in the garden and feel the prickling sensation of being watched from his study window. The housekeeper, so efficient and quiet, was she just cleaning? Or was she reporting back on my moods on the phone calls I made? He knew things, little things I'd only thought about, never said aloud. It made me question my own mind. Was I being dramatic? Was this all in my head? That was his most brilliant trick. You see, he didn't just silence me, he made me complicit in my own silencing, convincing me that my thoughts were untrustworthy. My voice was a liability. The decision to see a lawyer wasn't a burst of courage. It was a slow, creeping desperation, a final cold calculation for survival. I found her name on a slip of paper tucked inside a book at a library across town. Dr. Eris Thorne. Her office was the opposite of my life. Beige carpets, functional furniture, a complete and total anonymity that felt like a sanctuary. Sitting in that chair, for the first time, my hands wouldn't stop shaking. I kept looking at the door, expecting him to burst in having. I went upstairs later, and I just stood in the bathroom looking at myself in the mirror. My heart was beating so fast, the realization was like ice water. If I spoke, if I tried to explain my side to him, or to anyone, my words would be used against me. He'd call me emotional. He'd say I was misunderstanding. He'd twist everything my voice in his hands, would become a weapon to use against me. But a lawyer's voice, a lawyer's words, are on paper, they are structured, they are evidence they can't be. Somehow tracked my movements, my words, came out in a rushed, panicked whisper. She listened not like a therapist, but like a strategist. She didn't offer pity, she offered a plan. And the plan was silence, total, absolute silence to him. At least you are not to engage, she said, her voice calm and impossibly steady. Any conversation is a negotiation. And you are not negotiating from a position of strength. We will remove the conversation to a battlefield of our choosing. Our meetings became a covert operation. We never met at the same time, or on the same day of the week. I'd take 3 different taxis getting out blocks away. And walking the rest, I felt like a spy in my own city. But in that bland office, we were building a weapon. Every document Dr. Thorne prepared was a silent, precise move in a game. He didn't even know we were playing. The initial letter was a masterpiece. It wasn't angry. It wasn't emotional. It was a simple, stark recitation of facts, a formal notice of my intent to separate, and a list of proposed terms. It was my voice, but translated into a language he couldn't manipulate. It was the voice of the law, and it was utterly impervious to his charm, his threats, his gaslighting. The first package arrived by certified mail. I was in the sunroom, pretending to read, when he stormed in. The crisp white envelope crumpled in his fist. His face was a mask of confusion. Not yet rage. What is this? He demanded, waving the papers. Some kind of joke. I said nothing. I just looked at him, keeping my face as neutral as the beige walls of Dr. Thorne's office. I had practiced this moment. I simply closed my book, placed it on the table beside me, and waited. His confusion curdled into anger. Are you behind this? What are you trying to pull? Speak to me. He stepped closer, using his height, his presence, the old tactics that had always worked. This is nonsense. You're being foolish. You know you can't manage without me. Tell your lawyer, whoever this is, to drop this ridiculousness. I remained silent. I picked up my book again and turned a page. I didn't read. The silence infuriated him more than any screaming match ever could, because it was a silence. He didn't control it. Was my silence. The unraveling was a slow, meticulous process. Dr. Thorne's documents kept coming, interrogatories, requests for production of financial documents. Each one was a brick being pulled from the foundation of his control. He tried everything. He'd alternate between fury and pathetic pleas. He'd leave lavish gifts on my dressing table, with notes saying, let's forget this silliness. He'd have his own lawyer send aggressive letters, which Dr. Thorne would dissect and rebut with cold legal precision. My refusal to speak to him directly became a wall he could not scale. He couldn't twist my words, because I wasn't giving him any. He couldn't manufacture a version of events, because the only version that mattered was the one being meticulously documented in filed motions. Twisted so easily they exist in a world with rules. That was the moment, the quiet click of a decision being made. I would not speak, but I would find someone who could speak for me in a language he would have to respect. The key moment came about 2 months in. He cornered me in his study. He'd been drinking. The facade of the sophisticated gentleman was gone, stripped away by frustration and a fear he couldn't admit. Why won't you talk to me? He screamed, his voice cracking. What is wrong with you? I am your husband. Look at me. He was desperate, he was flailing, and I just stood there. Then I did the one thing Dr. Thorne and I had planned for. I picked up the phone on his desk, pressed the speaker button, and dialed the number I knew by heart. It rang twice. Dr. Thorne's office. Her assistant's voice filled the room. It's Eleanor Vance, I said, my voice clear and calm, the first words I'd spoken in his presence in weeks. Is the doctor available? My husband has some questions regarding the discovery process. There was a brief pause, then Dr. Thorne's cool, professional voice came through the speaker. Mr. Vance, this is a surprise. I trust you received our latest correspondence. I must advise you that any direct communication with my client regarding the case is inappropriate. All inquiries must go through me. The look on his face was something I will treasure forever. It was pure, undiluted shock, the realization that I wasn't just refusing to talk. I had substituted his voice for one that was infinitely more powerful. I had created a buffer he could not penetrate. He was no longer fighting his wife. He was fighting the entire impersonal weight of the legal system. He stared at the phone, then at my calm, expressionless face. And something in him broke. The fight just drained out of him. He sank into his chair, a man defeated not by a shout, but by a silence so profound it had its own legal representative. The final hearing was anticlimactic. There was no dramatic courtroom showdown, his lawyer seeing the meticulously organized evidence, the airtight financial disclosures. Wed forced, advised him to settle. We sat at a long table, him, his lawyer, me, and Dr. Thorne. The papers were signed with the scratch of pens. There was no eye contact, no final words, just the quiet administrative sound of an ending. Afterwards, the silence in my new apartment was different. It wasn't the heavy, suffocating silence of the marble house, where every quiet moment was filled with the threat of his disapproval. This silence was light, it was peaceful, it was mine. I could sit in it for hours, just listening to the city sounds outside, feeling the simple, profound relief of being unobserved. The twist, the thing he never understood, is that he didn't win, he thought, by taking my voice he had taken my power. But by forcing me into silence, he forced me to find a different, more formidable kind of voice. I learned to speak through action, through strategy, through the impeccable language of law and fact. I learned that a voice isn't just the sound you make with your vocal cords, it's the power to assert your will in the world, and my voice, now that I've chosen to use it again, is infinitely stronger because it's no. The next morning I called my friend Sarah from a coffee shop downtown. I told her a vague story about needing some professional advice for a family matter. She gave me a name, Elena Rostova. I looked her up. Her website was all sharp, clean lines. Her bio talked about high-net-worth divorces and complex asset division. I made the appointment for a day. I knew he was in meetings all afternoon. Longer, just emotion. It's been tempered in a fire. He lit. It's quiet, it's precise, and it knows exactly how to make itself heard. The house was always quiet, especially about money. It was the one subject we never really discussed. Oh, he'd tell me what the budget was for groceries, for the kids' clothes, for the things he considered my domain. But the rest of it, the investments, the properties, the real flow of money, that was his territory, his sole responsibility, and my role, as he so often reminded me, was not to worry my pretty little head about it. I was the silent partner in every sense of the word. I signed the tax returns he put in front of me. Without reading them, I nodded. When he said it was a bad year, that we had to tighten our belts, I believed him. When he said our future was secure in his hands, it was easier that way. It kept the peace. The incident happened on a Tuesday. He left his briefcase open on the hall table, something he never did. A stack of mail had spilled out, and there it was, nestled between a credit card statement and a golf magazine. A bank statement from a bank I'd never heard of. The account was in his name, only the balance was a number that didn't seem real. It was more than I thought we had in all our accounts combined. My heart started thumping, a dull, heavy rhythm in my chest. I just stood there holding this piece of paper that felt like a secret door into a room I never knew existed in my own home. He must have heard the paper rustle. He came out of his study, his face immediately darkening. He snatched the statement from my hand. His voice was low, cold, completely controlled. "Where did you get this?" I stammered something about the briefcase being open. He didn't even look at me. He just folded the paper neatly and put it in his inside jacket pocket. Then he turned those cold eyes on me. "This is none of your business. You don't need to know about these things. You wouldn't understand them anyway." He took a step closer. "We will never speak of this again. Is that clear?" I just nodded, my throat tight. He turned and walked back into his study, closing the door with a soft final click. That was the moment the horror dawned on me. It wasn't just about the money. It was about the dependency. He had built a life for me, where I was utterly reliant on him, while he was building a separate fortress of wealth. I wasn't permitted to enter. The potential for ruin was absolute. If he decided to walk away, what would I have? Nothing. I had signed away my career for this marriage, for this family. I had nothing that was truly mine. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay next to him, listening to his steady breathing, and I realized I was married to a stranger, a man who saw me not as a partner, but as an expense, a liability to be managed. The silence in the room was deafening. It was the silence of my own powerlessness. I knew then that if I ever wanted a voice, I couldn't find it within the walls of that marriage. I had to find someone who could speak a language. He understood the language of law. It took me 3 weeks to work up the courage. I called from a payphone during my weekly grocery trip. The woman on the other end of the line had a voice that was calm, measured, and sharp as a razor. She specialized in high-asset divorce and forensic accounting. I told her my story, my voice shaking, huddled in that phone booth, surrounded by the smell of old plastic and rain. She listened without interruption. When I finished, there was a brief silence. Then she said, "What you're describing is financial abuse. It's about Walking into her office was like stepping into another universe. It was quiet, but a different quiet than my house. This was a purposeful quiet. Her assistant offered me water. I sat in this modern chair, all cool leather and chrome. And I waited when Alina came out. She didn't smile a big reassuring smile. She had a firm handshake. Her eyes were direct. She led me into her office, a room with a huge window overlooking the city. She sat behind her desk and said, "Tell me why you're here." Control, and we can dismantle that control piece by piece. She became my forensic advocate, my voice. The process was terrifying. I had to become a spy in my own home. I started secretly gathering evidence. Every time he left a document out, I would take a picture with a disposable camera. I kept hidden in my underwear drawer. I started checking the mail before he got home, noting down return addresses on envelopes I didn't recognize. I kept a small notebook, a diary of financial clues, the name of a property management company he mentioned on a phone call, the logo on a key fob I found in his winter coat. I felt like a thief, a traitor. But with every piece of paper, I photographed every note I scribbled. I felt a little less silent. I was building a case. I was building my own truth. I would meet my lawyer in a bland, anonymous office downtown. I'd hand over the film and my little notebook. She was like a financial detective. She'd look at the pictures at my notes, and she'd start connecting dots. I couldn't even see this bank statement from the known account. Shows a transfer to a holding company. She'd say, pointing at a line of numbers, "That holding company, I've seen that name before. It's linked to a commercial property portfolio." She explained how he was likely moving assets, hiding income, creating layers of corporate entities to obscure the true value of what he owned. She wasn't just a lawyer. She was an archaeologist, carefully brushing away the dirt he had piled on top of our real financial life. She was piecing together the skeleton of our wealth, and it was a much larger, more complex creature than I had ever imagined. The day came for her to make the first formal move. She filed a motion demanding full and complete financial disclosure. She subpoenaed records from banks, from investment firms, from companies whose names I'd only seen in my secret photographs. The silence in our house shattered. He was served the papers at his office. He came home that night in a rage. He threw the legal documents on the kitchen table. "What is this?" he demanded, his voice shaking with a fury I'd never seen before. "What have you done?" I didn't say word. I just looked at him. For the first time, I saw panic in his eyes. It wasn't just anger, it was the panic of a man whose carefully constructed walls were beginning to crack. He was losing control. And I was finally seeing him for what he was: not a powerful titan, but a frightened man who had built his power on my silence. The discovery process was a brutal, methodical unmasking. We had to sit together in a conference room across a long table from him, and his lawyer, my lawyer, did all the talking. She would place a document in front of him. "Can you explain this transfer of $200,000 from your joint account to this numbered company in the Cayman Islands?" He would stammer. His lawyer would object, but the evidence was a trail of breadcrumbs, and my lawyer was following it relentlessly. She listed assets I never knew existed: a vacation home in Colorado he'd purchased through a trust, a silent partnership in a tech startup that had just been acquired, stock portfolios, bond holdings, art collections. With each new revelation, I saw him shrink a little in his chair. The bluster faded, replaced by a sullen, cornered defensiveness. I sat in complete silence, my hands folded in my lap. But my silence wasn't powerless anymore. It was deliberate. It was a choice. I was letting the facts, the numbers, the legal truth speak for me. And they were screaming. And I started from the beginning, not just the command to be silent, but all of it: the way he'd slowly taken over every financial decision, the way he'd referred to our money as his money. When he was angry, the separate accounts he'd opened for tax purposes, the condescending pats on the hand. When I asked a question about an investment, I told her about the isolation, the feeling of being managed like a subsidiary of his life. I didn't cry. My voice was steady. It felt like I was unloading. The power balance didn't just shift, it flipped entirely. His legal team, seeing the mountain of evidence, started pushing for a settlement. They didn't want this to go to a judge. My lawyer was merciless. She wasn't just asking for alimony. She was demanding a true division of the marital estate, the one he had tried to hide. She negotiated for a lump sum that reflected my contribution to the marriage, to his career, to building the life that had allowed him to accumulate that wealth. She secured investments in my name alone, a guaranteed income stream that wasn't dependent on his monthly checks. She was building me a lifeboat, not just handing me a paddle. The final court hearing was a formality. the judge reviewed the settlement agreement, a thick document that represented my economic emancipation. My husband sat slumped beside his lawyer, refusing to look at me when the judge asked if I agreed to the terms. I simply said, "Yes, Your Honor." That was the only word I spoke. The judge stamped the paper, and it was over. The silence in the courtroom was different from the silence in my house. This silence was peaceful. It was the silence of a battle ended, of a truth acknowledged. Walking out of that courthouse, the sunlight felt different on my skin, the air felt clearer. The lesson was etched into my bones. Financial silence is the deepest form of vulnerability. It's handing someone else the keys to your entire life and hoping they won't lock you out. But legal speech, the kind wielded by someone who knows the system, who can follow the money, is the most profound empowerment. He told me not to speak, so I found the one voice he couldn't ignore. I let my lawyer do the talking, and she didn't just get me a settlement, she gave me back my future. She gave me a self that existed independently of him. She turned my silence from a prison into a strategy, and in the end, it was the silence that spoke the loudest. The phone felt cold and heavy in my hand. His voice on the other end wasn't loud, not yet, but it had that sharp edge that always made my stomach tighten. It started like it always did, over something small, a schedule change for our daughter's dentist appointment, a request to switch a weekend. But I knew I could feel it in the air, even through the phone line, that it was a trap. The conversation wasn't about the dentist. It was a test, a demand for my immediate and silent compliance. I tried to explain the reason for the change, my voice calm, too calm, the kind of calm you have to force through a layer of ice. He cut me off. "This is exactly the problem," he said. And the tone dropped, became quieter, more dangerous. "You make these decisions without me. You think you know what's best, but you don't." He started listing grievances, things from months ago, twisting them into a pattern of me being unreliable, difficult. Then he said the words that had become his ultimate weapon: "If you can't cooperate, if you keep this up, we're going to have to talk about a different custody arrangement. A judge will see how unstable this is for the kids. They don't need this back and forth with a mother who can't follow a simple plan." It was a threat he'd used before. Each time, it hollowed me out. The fear was immediate, a physical coldness, spreading from my chest out to my fingers. The idea of losing time with my children, of having a judge see me the way he was painting me, was a terror. I couldn't articulate. I'd always back down before I'd apologize, agree to his terms, just to make the threat go away. I'd hang up the phone and sit in the silence, my heart pounding, hating myself for surrendering, but feeling I had no other choice. The arguments, bricks from a bag I'd been carrying for years, were a battlefield where he held all the weapons, and our children were standing right in the middle of the crossfire. This time something was different. This time, after he hung up, I went to check on our son. He was supposed to be asleep, but I found him sitting on the floor in the hallway, his little shoulders shaking. He wasn't crying loudly, just quiet, hitching breaths. He'd heard the raised voices, my desperate, placating tone, his father's cold, final words. He looked up at me, his face wet, and asked, "Are you and Daddy going to get a divorce?" And I realized in that moment that my fear, my willingness to engage in these toxic arguments, was the real instability. My attempts to reason, to defend myself, were just adding fuel to a fire that was already burning them. The problem wasn't the disagreement, the problem was the conversation itself. The emotional battlefield had to be dismantled. Our children needed a ceasefire, not a winner. They needed a peace treaty. And I finally understood. I couldn't negotiate it alone. I needed a professional, a neutral party, whose only job was to build a wall between the war and the children. The lawyer's office was quite a world away from the chaotic tension of my home. Her desk was neat, everything in its place. She didn't offer empty sympathies. She listened, her eyes sharp and focused, as I explained the pattern, the escalating arguments, the custody threats, the moment with my son in the hallway. I told her my goal wasn't to punish him or to win. My goal was to build a shield, a barrier made of paper and legal precedent that would protect our children from the shrapnel of our failed communication. She nodded. She understood perfectly. "What you're describing," she said, "is the need for a structured co-parenting framework. The goal is to remove the emotion and the opportunity for conflict. We make the system so clear, so objective, that there's nothing left to argue about together." We started drafting the parenting plan. It was the most detailed document I had ever seen. It wasn't just about who had the children on which holidays. It was a blueprint for their lives. It specified the method of communication, a specific business-focused co-parenting app, where every message was timestamped, and recorded it outlined rules for scheduling changes, requiring a 7-hour notice, and a valid reason. It detailed how expenses would be split down to the percentage for extracurricular activities and uncovered medical costs. It established rules about introducing new partners to the children, about travel notifications, about how decisions regarding schools and doctors would be. We included a right of first refusal clause, so if one of us couldn't care for the children during our time for more than a few hours, the other parent had to be offered the time first. This was to prevent them from being shuffled off to babysitters unnecessarily. We built in a dispute resolution clause, a step-by-step process that started with mediation. Before anyone could even think about filing a motion with the court, this plan was our fortress. Its foundation was the children's well-being, and every brick was a rule designed to give them predictability and stability. My lawyer was the architect, and I was finally feeling like a general protecting her troops, instead of a soldier, just trying to survive the next ambush. The first test came quickly. He texted me a familiar demanding message about wanting to take the kids out of town on a weekend that was technically mine. The old me would have felt the anxiety spike, would have tried to craft a careful diplomatic response, which would have inevitably led to a phone call. An argument. This time, I didn't respond to him at all. I took a screenshot of his text and uploaded it to the co-parenting app. Then I typed my response there for the record per our parenting plan. She listened. She took notes on a yellow legal pad. She didn't interrupt. When I finished, she put her pen down. Okay. She said, first, you've done the right thing by coming here. Second, your husband gave you excellent advice. I must have looked shocked. She leaned forward. He told you not to speak. Good. You are going to follow that instruction to the letter. From this moment on, you say nothing to him about any of this. If he asks you a question about money, about plans, about anything substantive, you say, I think that's. Schedule change requests require 7 to 2 hours notice and mutual agreement. This request does not meet the notice requirement. I am not in agreement to alter the schedule for this weekend. The children have a prior commitment with their grandparents. I watched the app. A few minutes later, I saw that he had read it. Then his response appeared. It was furious, a string of messages, questioning my rigidity, accusing me of using the children as pawns, of being unreasonable. He tried to call my phone. I let it go to voicemail. He texted my personal number again. I didn't open it. The rules were the rules. The shield was holding. His frustration was palpable, even through the digital interface. But it was now contained. It was being vented into a legal record, not shouted at me over the phone where our daughter could overhear. He was no longer arguing with me, his emotional ex-wife. He was bumping up against the cold, unyielding structure of a legally binding agreement. My lawyer sent him the formal copy of the proposed parenting plan. His response to her was predictably angry. He accused her of poisoning the situation, of turning a family matter into a legal war. But he couldn't argue with her. He couldn't threaten her with custody battles. She was impervious to his tactics. She responded with professional detachment, explaining the benefits of the plan for the children's consistency, and offering to discuss modifications through proper channels. The subjective fights about who was right or wrong, who was more difficult, were gone. They were replaced by a discussion of clauses and provisions. The conversation had been moved from a muddy emotional trench to a clean, well-lit conference room, and he had no power there. The court date was a formality. The judge, a weary-looking woman with kind eyes, reviewed our signed agreement. She asked a few questions, mostly directed at my lawyer, about the communication protocols and the dispute resolution steps. She praised the thoroughness of the plan. This is exactly what we like to see, she said, stamping the document. Parents putting the children's need for structure ahead of their own disagreements. This is in the best interests of the children. The gavel came down, and it was over. The shield was now enforceable by the full weight of the court. The dynamic at the children's school events changed. We didn't sit together. We didn't speak. Sometimes we'd be there at the same time on opposite sides of the auditorium for a concert, or standing far apart on the soccer field sidelines. There was a distance of formality, but there was no tension. The children would run from him to me, their faces open and happy, not darting nervous glances between us to gauge the mood. They knew the schedule. They had a calendar on the fridge. They could check. The uncertainty was gone. The air was clear. My communication with him now exists solely on that app. It is brief, factual, and solely about the children's soccer practice. Moved to 5 p.m. This Thursday. Received the reimbursement for the school trip. Thank you. Can you send his allergy medication with him? Tomorrow it's business like it is peace. I sometimes think about the silence I was commanded to keep. He told me not to speak. So I stopped. I let a 50-page parenting plan and a professional communicator do the talking for me. And in that